Hello and welcome to Afternoon Edition Extra.
You've got it.
Yeah.
This is what's been happening when I've been away for 2 weeks. You've learnt what the name of the podcast is.
Did it just for you. I'm just blown away by that guy that we've just spoken to. I know it's not going to be on the podcast, but it's freaking me out.
This is
Rob
worth
Young.
going back and listening to on the
iPlayer.
Go to Afternoon Edition. And I can't believe we're plugging the iPlayer on a podcast. How tri-media of us.
But this is a guy called Rob Young. He hasn't stopped running for about 20 years. If you think Eddie Izzard's done a lot of running, this man will blow your socks off. Anyway, he's on the other bit. This is the podcast bit. Chris Rea, probably not done quite as much running, but he's done an awful lot of guitar playing.
He's done a lot of guitar playing. He has had his health issues. He does talk about that. And, you know, he set me up for a joke that I think I first thought of when I was about 10 years old, and I slightly blew it on air. I wish I'd just waited longer to deliver it. When I genuinely, I asked him what group he'd most like to have joined, and he said Dire Straits. And ever since I was a kid, I thought if Chris Rea joined Dire Straits, they'd be called Diarrhea. And when I said, so you didn't get it, did you? When I said it on air?
Well, when you said it, I thought, God, that's quite rude of Colin.
But that was why I should have gone. I blew it. I slightly blew. Honestly, it was like honestly, I once met a man, and I said, "What's up with your dog?" And he said, "It's got no nose." And he honestly said it. And I was thinking, this is another moment when you've been waiting all your life to say the joke. And at that time, I got it right. How does it smell? Awful. Yeah. Anyway,
look, we're not talking about this. We're not talking about Chris Rea, are we? Come on, let's sell Chris Rea. Why did we have Chris Rea?
Chris Rea, one of the biggest music stars in Britain. He was first nominated for Best New Act at the Grammys back in 1978, because Fool If You Think It's Over, his first single, huge hit over there. Massive hits like Josephine, Driving Home for Christmas, The Road to Hell. Nominated for Best Male at the Brits, 88, 89, 90. Is that enough of a sell?
That's beautiful. And you did that without even looking at a single note. We're also talking to him about his project La Passione, which is cars, but specifically one man, Wolfgang von Trips, who I'd never even heard of.
Yes, he didn't quite tell the whole story. Basically, he is a chap, a motor racing driver who was going to win the World Championship in 1961. He needed to come third in his Ferrari in the Italian Grand Prix to win the championship. He clipped Jim Clark, the motor racing driver's wheels, flipped into the crowd. 15 people were killed. He died. And Chris Rea was captured by this story and then made this documentary about it. He first made the film in 1996. He didn't like what was done with it. He lost control of it. He's regained control of it, and he's made this, as you say, it's kind of part coffee table book, 2 albums, 2 DVDs off it.
His
if you
paintings.
love cars and you love Chris Rea, you'll be in luck.
And the story about how he came across the Wolfgang von Trips Museum is really rather wonderful. Here he is, Chris Rea. One of the UK's best-known singer-songwriters, more than 30 million albums he sold worldwide, once described as a gravel-voiced guitar stalwart. I think we could probably do better than that, can't we? His latest project is La Passione, I hope I've pronounced that correctly, which combines his love of racing, Ferraris and music. Where did this start, Chris?
It started many years ago in a far-off distant land. There was a little boy in his Italian family, and he was watching with his uncles and his dad, and obviously they want these Ferraris to win, and Sterling Moss was leaving them all standing. And because of static cameras in those days, you never actually got a good look at the cars. You'd see someone whoosh by, and in the distance you could see these very, very streamlined cars, and they called them squally or shark noses. And all the little boy could do was imagine what his dad and his uncles was telling him. And because his little boy has got this terrible problem with imagination, too much of it, it lived with him for all of his life. You know, who was this German guy? And then he got killed, and the little boy goes to pieces because he was absolutely obsessed with him.
And this is based on you, isn't it? As a little boy growing up in Middlesbrough, because you had that moment back in 1961 watching Le Mans on TV. How special a moment was that to you?
Well, my daughters now, they laugh at things like this because they don't have a sense of what it was like in those days to actually get out of bed in the middle of the night and go and watch some cars in a field in France, and your dad's telling you about the wonderful smells of the fantastic food, and there's Wolfgang von Trips leading the race. And it just has such a huge effect on you when you're from what I call a black and white world of a steel town in the north. And you have this whole idea of Italy, and your father tells you it gets warmer as you get closer to Italy because that's where the sun comes from. It's as if the sun is in St. Peter's Square in Rome. And then many, many, many years go by and you've got a day off in Cologne, in Germany on tour, and you actually turn a corner and you walk in to this sign that says Wolfgang von Trips Museum. And I was like a little girl, I was like, what can this be?
It exists.
Yeah, and they invite me in, it's almost like some kind of LSD trip. And they show me all of his stuff. They show me the car he was designing before he got killed.
Yeah, for people who don't know, and we're talking sporting heroes later on, but for many people at the start of the 60s, he was an icon. But for many of our younger listeners, they won't actually know who Wolfgang von Trips is. Just explain who he was.
He was a proper German count, which I always have difficulty. I have to be careful I say the right word there. He lived in a huge castle with a moat round it, and he drove to Italy to race red Ferraris. I mean, it just... Because the knowledge and the news was limited, you were left to your own imagination to build the pictures, because, you don't have 24-hour TV and stuff. You didn't even have colour television in them days. I always thought blood red Ferraris were a lot darker. My father told me they were blood red. And because it's black and white TV, I imagined a real dark red. When I saw my first Ferrari, I was quite disappointed. It was a bit orange.
The Rosso Corsa.
Yeah.
It sounds so romantic, though, the story of Wolfgang.
Oh, it was huge, huge. I mean, we had such fun because what happened next in the museum was they gave me his holiday films. Now, he obviously had a few bob, because he had 16mm camera, and it was just him on his holidays. And because he's doing all the camera work, you were given 3 hours of Fangio, Stirling Moss, ice cream fights behind the pits in the 50s. It was just astounding to watch this stuff that had never been seen before.
And you've been given the honour of releasing it now, because to explain what this is, it's more than CDs. 2 CDs of the music. There's 1 DVD, which is a series of short films you made, and then there's videos to go along with it. And then there's another DVD that is a Wolfgang von Trips film, basically a documentary about his life, using that footage that you were talking about.
Yeah, when we first brought La Passione out over 10 years ago, a lot of people got involved, executives, all that. I got put out of action completely. So I always said to myself, one day I'll go back to the Von Trips Association. I'll get the films off them again, and I'll do the job the way I think it should have been done in the first place. And we used a lot of his footage to make up surreal dreams that the little boy would have that are set to the choreographed to music. Because it was so easy to do, because it was such amazing stuff to look at, The amount of girls he had was just unbelievable. I mean, we even have Jane Mansfield, with a not very happy boyfriend next to her in a car, talking to Wolfgang. And for me, and for people who remember the early 60s, it has a bigger effect on you as things like the Beatles,
And as we were explaining earlier, a tragic end to his life. 1961, the Italian Grand Prix. He just needs to come third to win the whole championship. And you have the footage of what happened next. Describe it for those who don't know.
Well, we had to be very careful because I didn't want to make it into a gratuitous, horrible scene. And I had this idea one day that what we should do is go back at the end of his life. We go back to the little boy on the carpet and he reenacts the crash with his toy dinky toys. Because I remember we used to do that. We used to sit with our dinky toys and reenact little bits of Formula One, which seems so more exciting than it is now.
And to think then that all of these years, this man had such a huge impression on you, Chris. What was the point where you thought, well, I actually I have to put this at the forefront now of my mind and of my creativity?
Well, I think we killed the ghost off because editing it was very, very hard. And he always had this little nervous action of when he got in a car, he put his hands down slowly to check his goggles. And by the end of we'd finished doing it, he was getting on my nerves. For God's sake, leave them goggles alone, you know. And it's a funny feeling to kill such a big ghost. And he had a terrible taste of hats.
Well, that rules him out then, of my hero then. And we didn't even mention the book as well, which is full of drawings and artworks that you've created. Have you always been creative on that side as well, of drawing and painting?
No, I wasn't. What happened was when I was extremely ill and out of action for 18 months, my poor wife, she was running short of things to give Chris to do while he's trying to get weight back on. And, you know, I was only 8 stone when I got home.
8 stone?
Yeah, and I was 16 when I went in. They said if I hadn't been so fat when I first went in, that I mightn't have actually survived. So sometimes fat is good. And she said, let's play with paint. And she got 2 colours, and green and yellow, and she said mix them together and it became this beautiful phthalo blue. And it was like, I thought it was magic. And that was it. From that day on, I paint every single day.
Just to give people an idea of just how ill you were, Chris, when you were diagnosed with cancer and facing this huge operation, 16-hour operation that you had a 1 in 3 survival rate. How did you and your wife and family deal with that prognosis?
I was the lucky one. You know, they put me on stuff to calm me down, get me ready. But for my wife, it was dreadful. And I didn't know till afterwards. I always remember when the pathology report came through, a nurse came in, she said, Mr. Russell said, I can tell you the answer, you know, because obviously you're all waiting. And it's okay. It can come back, but it's not malignant. It's not grade 3. So I said, okay. You know, I was on an awful lot of painkillers and stuff, so I was in a dreamland. Sorry, that was my fault.
That's all right, you keep going. We'll let you off. You're Chris Rea.
And the nurse said, well, phone your wife. And so I phoned my wife, and she said, Joan, phone Joan. She didn't say phone Mrs. Rea. And it suddenly occurred to me that she knew all the nurses. She'd been there weeks, in and out, every day, and I didn't know a thing about it. So in a funny way, I got off quite light emotionally. Physically, it was hard. I mean, it still is hard now. I'm type 1 diabetic, and I still have an awful lot of repercussion problems. I'm averaging about 1 operation every 18 months.
Goodness me.
Has it affected your ability to tour?
Yes, very much, actually, to be honest. One of the problems I have is they move so much stuff around. I have a very unpredictable gut. And obviously, things can go wrong. And you have to do a lot of planning to make sure you're always in the right place at the right time. I know what you must know what I mean by that.
Oh, yes. Build in special breaks into the set.
Montezuma's Revenge, yeah.
That's what my mum calls it
Yeah.
as well. So no joining AC/DC for you then. What do you think about that, just by the way? Axl Rose joining AC/DC as their frontman.
I think it's dreadful.
Why?
Because my pal from Newcastle was a good pal of mine.
Brian.
I once got Brian into a lot of trouble once talking to one of his wives. And I was telling her how I get home every now and then. And she said, well, no, you don't get home. I said, yeah, I get home every now and then. It's not easy. She said, no, Brian said, you can never come home when you're on tour.
Oh.
And then the next thing I heard was somebody getting smacked across the face. And I hope he's forgiven me by now. Has he really gone deaf? Is that true?
Well,
I
there's
don't
a
know,
lot of
Chris.
debates. There's a lot of debate as to whether he was pushed from the band or whether he chose to leave for medical grounds. I mean, how disappointed, as someone who knows him, do you think he will be to no longer be singing with AC/DC?
Well, if they asked him to go, I think he'll be devastated. Because he's your classic rocker. He's completely opposite to me. You know, I'm Mr. Family Man. I love music. I love art. You know, you could almost up north call me a homosexual because I like flowers, you know. But Brian's not like that at all.
Tell us how you...
He's a very good driver, actually.
Is he?
He loves
Yeah.
his motorsports, doesn't he?
Yeah, he's a very good racing driver.
Tell us how you started playing the guitar, Chris, because I was absolutely amazed to find that you came to it late.
Yeah, I was 22. I went into my mother's bedroom. She had one of these new kitsch alarm clocks that's supposed to make tea, and it never did. It always went off at the wrong time. It came on a Saturday afternoon. I was using her mirror because I'm off out, you know, checking the back of me hair and blah, blah, blah. And this satellite, one of the first satellite BBC programmes on a Saturday afternoon came on. And it had this guy called Patton. And he had a big, big, huge, deep voice. And he seemed to be playing like a violin, but with very bluesy emotion. And I thought, Jesus Christ, I could do that. Because, you know, I have a terrible voice, really. I have a terrible singing voice. But it's just like his. So I went out on the night. Someone told me that this sound was a bottleneck. My first bottleneck was one of my sister's nail varnish bottles in metallic pink. I always remember that. That's how I started. I was about 22-year-old. Most people had retired by then.
How good could you have been then if you'd started earlier?
Oh, yeah. I'm sure Mr. Knopfler said that's absolutely no excuse, Chris. You don't practice enough, you know.
If you could have joined any band ever, like Axl Rose is getting his one shot at touring with AC/DC, which band would you like to have joined?
I definitely think it would have been Dire Straits.
For the joke, what, diarrhea?
Yeah, yeah. Oh, no, we've all had that.
Oh,
one.
stop it. That's terrible, Colin.
Yeah. My local nickname was Gonorrhea. I can top that.
What was it about Dire Straits that was so amazing? And would it have worked having two big guitarists like yourself and Mark at the front?
I don't consider myself to be anywhere near the guitarist that Mark Knopfler is. Never. That's why we get on, you know. I'm never in any doubt whatsoever. His technical supremacy is Olympic. You know, he could almost get a gold medal at the Olympics for his technique. But I think I would have loved. I mean, my favourite song of all time is Telegraph Road, and to have sung Telegraph Road would have been great for me. I'd have loved that.
Chris, well, so many bands have reformed over the years. Why have Dire Straits never got back together?
Because he's got a brain in his head. He doesn't need the money. That's one of the main reasons. We all get to I get back together with myself when I need a few bob. That's the main reason. He doesn't need the money, and apart from that, he has new ideas every year, and that's what he's into. You know, talk about guitars, guitar playing, and he'll talk to you 24 hours non-stop.
I was reading a really interesting story about Driving Home for Christmas, which is regularly cited as people's favourite Christmas song. And I had always imagined you driving when you were singing that song, right? But the truth is that you weren't driving, were you?
I was banned.
Tell us how that came about.
Well, the famous London riots, why I remember that is because I got mixed up in it just by trying to park a car. And then I got breathalyzed, and that was the end of it. And My wife used to have to, because we didn't have much money in them days, she used to have to drive down to London, pick me up, because it was cheaper than getting the train, and take me home again. And I was in one of those very few happy moments. You know, it doesn't happen to me a lot. But I found the actual scribbled piece of paper about 4 years later. Me and Max Middleton, the famous piano player, we were testing some digital pianos. And we went into this Count Basie kind of thing, you know, nice 50s, skippy piano and all that. And it went out as a B-side. It was never released as a single, never intended to be a hit. And I'm really glad.
Yeah,
I'm glad.
A lot of people are as well.
Being driven home for Christmas wouldn't have had the same ring to it, really, would it?
Not with my wife's driving, no.
But it's a special one, I think, for people that are a long way away from home at Christmas, as so many people are. I mean, you'll know this, being of Italian and Irish heritage. When you miss home and you miss where you're from, it has a special resonance for people that have to go a really long way, doesn't it?
Oh yeah, there was a magical moment I think there is in most people's lives, where you've left home, but the stuff that you adored and you still love and hang on to is still there a little bit. And so you are extremely excited to get back to see the same Christmas tree that your dad used to put up and blah, blah, blah. Yeah, driving home for Christmas is a genuine sentiment.
Chris, we haven't played anything from your new project yet. We're going to let you choose. You can either have Girl in a Sports Car or the title track, La Passione. Which would you like us to play?
I'd like When the Grey Skies Turn to Blue.
Oh, we don't have it lined up. We don't have it lined up.
It's the best song I ever wrote.
Oh, really? Why?
It is. It's one of those songs where you write every day, you talk about writing, you scrap things. Sometimes you go to the piano and you sing the words that are actually in your head, and it all comes out in one flow, and then you know. I had to check with that song that I hadn't nicked it. It sounds like a standard, and I just still love that song. It's one of the few songs I've written I love.
Oh, do you want one of your songs or not? We can offer you these too.
Apart from that, I'm not bothered.
All right, let's go for Girl in a Sports Car. This is off the new project, La Passione.
When I was a boy, I had a dream. It never came true, but somehow it seems when I drift away and not knowing so, there's a certain time and a place I go.
What's not to like about that?
Kind of recreating 1960s, driving a Ferrari around Italy. Isn't
I'm
that
there.
the vibe?
Yeah, it's a dream that never came true, isn't it? No, the strings were great fun to do. There's a very famous tape somewhere, I'm glad it's gone missing, and it's me singing the string lines to Max Middleton, who's writing them down. And it borders on the ridiculous, you know, it's Monty Python. But this film, if you watch the film, it's got all his girlfriends in, and it really is nostalgic, you know, to how you saw life in those days.
Chris, it was really interesting a minute ago you said about Grey Skies Turn to Blue, one of the few songs that you're very proud of. And earlier you said about the driving home for Christmas time, being there with your wife in the car. It was one of the few times I was really happy. But you always have struck me as somebody who's very upbeat. But are you really? Have you had your struggles on that front?
Yeah, I've had lots of struggles on that. One of the things I do that I've done in sort of heavy music interviews, I get really deep and dark, and especially with the illnesses. But it actually doesn't make me want to make that kind of music, and it doesn't want to make me do that kind of painting. It makes me want to do the opposite. So I'm always trying to cheer myself up.
And does it work? Sometimes.
Sometimes, yeah.
But you just keep trying.
So far, I've avoided the Prozac.
So you do it without any form of drugs at all?
I smoke a terrible amount.
Yeah, well, me too, but hey, let's not talk about that. I love I don't know whether to call it a poem or a story, the one about the driver. He is perfectly comfortable with it. The untrained eye would think he is losing control. He isn't. He is in a place that only he can exist. It is the very centre of his life. Those words, or if they're lyrics, they're really insightful about driving.
Well, it's all about the photograph that's on that page. We knew this photograph since we were kids, and it's Fanjo, and he's in a drift, a four-wheel drift, and he seems to be gazing past the camera, and you start to look at his eyes behind the goggles, and he is completely calm. He could be thinking about what he's going to have for dinner. But the reality is he's got no seatbelt, he's got no roll cage. There are trees, walls, ditches, and he's doing 145 miles an hour.
And that's a lot of footage of that kind of thing on La Passion, your new project, which is out this week. Chris, very, very briefly, will you be touring in the near future again? I'm sure fans want to know.
Sometimes after next Christmas, probably.
Magic. Look forward to it. Thank you so much for talking to us, Chris. It's been a real pleasure. Thanks a lot. Chris Rea.